With the release of Shadow of the Erdtree and its subsequent nomination for Game of the Year, Elden Ring has once again risen and showed just how much better From Software is at making AAA titles than every other game studio in recent years. Ever since they started making Soulsborne games, they've just been dropping banger after banger after banger. What starts out as a seemingly simple journey ends in you having to fight giant beasts and gods beyond our comprehension. And where there are powerful characters, the question of who is the strongest will inevitably come up. So let's see just how strong these Soulsborne protagonists are and how they compare to each other. Coming in at the last place is unfortunately the protagonist from my favorite Soulsborne game, Wolf, also known as Sekiro. Ability-wise, he might be at the top of the ranking, having Type 4 Immortality along with Invulnerability and Immortality Negation through the Mortal Blade. I know all these Soulsborne protags technically have the ability to come back from death, but that is either because of gameplay mechanics or some outside force like Grace. Wolf can just come back to life on the spot and doesn't really need to be resurrected elsewhere. But these abilities don't really make up for his lack of strength. In terms of his physical strength, he's capable of parrying the giant sword wielded by the Divine Dragon, which is swung with enough power to blow away an entire town. These same swings are also just slightly slower than lightning, which is consistent as many characters in the game are able to react to and catch lightning. This actually puts him on the faster side of the ranking, as lightning moves at around 1,200 times the speed of sound, but it's not nearly enough to make up for his lack of strength. In fourth place is the Slayer of Demons from Demon's Souls. This is the game I know the least about, and it's the one I found the least info on, so I'm gonna purposefully keep the scaling kinda vague, as I don't really know a lot about it. For early game scaling, the Slayer of Demons is comparable to the Armored Spider, which can shoot flaming boulders that are so hot that they literally vaporize on impact. And this would require around 2.7 tons of TNT, or enough to blow up a large building. The player is also obviously more powerful than the Tower Knight, who should be around the same level as the Giants of the Northern Land. And the Giants are capable of outputting around the town levels of force due to their massive size and estimated speed. And even if we say that the Giants are superior to the Knight, at the end of the game, the Slayer is the strongest being in history, so they would outscale the Giants anyway. But like almost every Soulsborne game, if we want the good stuff, we have to look at the lore. Within Demon's Souls, there are beings called Monumentals. These beings hold the power to keep the Old One at bay and the power to keep reality from collapsing. The Old One was a being that swallowed life on half the world and threatened to destroy everything. In the good ending, the player becomes a new Monumental and is able to hold reality together with their unprecedented power. The word reality would lead you to believe that the Monumentals hold the entire universe together, but from what we know, reality in this case is referring to the planet alone, as the Monumentals were only formed due to a global event, and whenever the threat of the Old One is talked about, it's only ever referred to as a threat to the world or your world. We don't really have any confirmation on how fast the Old One's influence was spreading, but we know that at the very least, it was fast enough to consume and destroy half the world in a short amount of time. We get an idea of what the other part of the world looks like, and it's just a flat, dark wasteland. This means that at the very least, the Old One can tear down mountains, and at best it can obliterate countries or even continents in a short amount of time. Compared to the player's AP, their speed is relatively underwhelming. And that is something that will be pretty common for these games, because speed is usually not something that is brought up in the lore. So because of that, the best speed feats we have in the game are in the supersonic ranges. And the more concrete scaling for this comes from the Maneater, who uses sound-based attacks that the player is able to react to and dodge. With the player being much stronger and faster in the endgame, it's safe to say that they would have surpassed these transonic speeds and should be around supersonic at least, placing the Slayer of Demons anywhere between mountain level and continental with supersonic speeds. At the number 3 spot, we have the Hunter from Bloodborne. This is probably going to be my most controversial take this video, but I'm gonna say it. The Hunter caps at large planetary. Now, before all you Bloodborne fans come at me in the comments, let me explain. The most common scaling method for Bloodborne is to say that the Hunter is comparable to the Great Ones, and the Great Ones are able to transcend to higher dimensions. Therefore, the Hunter is at least 5D. But it's not that simple. The truth behind the Great One's origins and what them being of a higher dimension truly means is pretty vague, but from my point of view, when it's said that the Great Ones ascended into a higher plane of existence, it seems to be more implying that their minds are ascending. Quote from the Isrot Chalice. According to the choir, the land of Is lies in contact with the cosmos, which allows the Great Ones to function on transcendental planes of thought. This makes sense as the Great Ones were at one point very clearly visible and sleeping. For you who have played the game, you might be wondering why the amygdala were invisible. Surely these beings shouldn't be invisible if they aren't of a higher dimensional existence. But this is all explained by Rom. Rom kept up a barrier that shielded the inhabitants of Yharnam from the truth, which literally means that the amygdala were hidden. By increasing your insight stat, you are able to partially see past this barrier, but it's only when Rom is dead that the amygdala become fully visible. This idea of higher existence only referring to a higher plane of thought is also backed up by the insight stat itself. At the end of the game, you encounter the Moon Presence, and when this happens, the Great One will take over the Hunter's mind and make them into its new puppet. It's only if you consume 3 umbilical cords that the Hunter will become immune to its influence. The umbilical cord is specifically an item that increases one's insight stat, and by consuming all 3, you gain the mind of a Great One, or what is called eyes on the inside, meaning that your mind has now ascended to a higher plane. The Great Ones are not literally transcending to higher dimensions, they're just functioning within a higher plane of thought. As for how strong the Hunter actually is, they are stronger than the Moon Presence, which is capable of moving the moon with large planetary levels of energy, and we also know that the Great Ones can create nightmare realms, which usually contain moons and are likely parallel to Earth, making them planet-sized. In terms of speed, the Moon Presence could leap from the moon down to the surface of the Hunter's Dream, which would put its speed at between somewhat faster than lightning to 25% the speed of light, with the lower end being more reliable. Next up are the Dark Souls protagonists, and I will be combining all of them into one because all of them should logically be relative in power, with the third game's Ashen one being the strongest. There are 2 different ends to scaling this. First is if you don't believe that the Lords of Cinder scale to the first flame, and the second is if you think they do. First up, if you don't believe that they scale to the first flame, which I personally find weird as it's stated that the Lords of Cinder's souls can keep the flame lit, and as such their souls would be strong enough to keep it alive. But still, if you don't believe that, then at the absolute least, the Ashen Ones should scale to around small country level based on them being stronger than the Soul of Cinder, and as such would be more powerful than the Archdragon Peak Bell, which can generate gusts of wind capable of blowing away large storms. However, if you do agree with the Ashen Ones scaling to the first flame, then they would get a whole lot stronger. The first flame created light throughout the entire world and brought dualities like light and dark, hot and cold, and life and death into the world. But the first flame is ironically shrouded in darkness. The lore around it is pretty vague and up for interpretation, but something that a lot of people agree with is that the sun and the first flame are mostly one and the same, or at least have a very strong connection. We can see this through things like the sun being eclipsed when the first flame is fading, and in the alternate world from Dark Souls 3, where the sun just does not exist anymore due to the flame not having been linked. This would mean that the sun was created by the first flame, and its life is connected to the flame. And as such, the soul of a Lord of Cinder is strong enough to keep the sun alive, which would mean that the Ashen One, scaling above all the Lords of Cinder and the Soul of Cinder itself, should be higher into star level. Some people might want to argue that this would be like galaxy level, as the flame would be connected to all the stars, but I don't think that's the case, and I don't believe that's what the story is trying to say. I believe that the first flame is a sort of metaphor for the sun specifically. It's never stated that the first flame brought life into the entire universe. The scope of its influence is never described, and it's not like the flame going out means that light can't exist. In the other world where the flame went out, the sun is gone but candles still burn. The flame isn't a literal representation of all light, it's just a representation from the light of the sun. When the first flame was born, it created the duality of life and death, not because those concepts were brought into existence, but because without sunlight, the surface of the world would just be a field of rocks, much like the stone scales that made the ancient dragons immortal. Even though the Ashen One is strong, the speed scaling for Dark Souls is as underwhelming as it is for Demon Souls. The best speed feats in the series are the player being able to react to and dodge the Dragon Slayer arrow and the trap bolts from Sen's Fortress, both of which being around Mach 1.2. There are arguments for lightning and even FTL speeds, but there are a few problems with these. First up, pretty much all lightning-based attacks in the game are not cloud to ground lightning and are instead spears or projectiles like Gwyn's bolts, which means that we cannot actually say that they are lightning speed. And for the light speed scaling, it mostly comes from the sunlight spear, which is described as a ray of light, but it appears to more so be a light construct as opposed to an actual beam of light, especially since it is a physical object that can be held. Now, let's move on to the latest game in the Soulsborne franchise, Elden Ring. Out of all the Soulsborne games, Elden Ring by far has the most unagreed upon scaling, with some people believing that the verse caps at mountain level, while others think it gets as high as outer versal. Now, I do think it scales higher than mountain level, but explaining why that is will come naturally, so I don't need to debunk any mountain level caps. But what I do want to discuss is the outer versal argument. Basically, the argument stems from the Elden Beast being the living embodiment of the concept of order, and since order would count as a platonic concept that exists outside physical reality, it would make the Elden Beast outer. Ignoring the fact that you would actually need to transcend platonic concepts to be outer, and simply being a concept would be more like low outer, this doesn't really work. The Elden Beast is the embodiment of order. It is not the concept itself. The Elden Beast and the Elden Ring are things that bring order to the world. They are more like conduits for order. Nothing that I have found in any item, spell, or boss description that I have read, and believe me, I have read a shitload of item descriptions for this video, would lead me to believe that the Elden Beast or the Elden Ring are anything more than vessels for the concept of order. For the actual scaling, the Tarnished should at the very least be around solar system level. This is due to early to mid-game Tarnished being able to take down Radahn, who was able to stop the movement of the stars with the power of his gravity magic. This would mean that at the very least, he was able to stop the kinetic energy of all the stars. Just the sun alone has a kinetic energy of around 4.8 times 10 to the power of 40 joules, or small star level. But Radahn stopped every single visible star in the night sky. The naked eye can see up to 2,500 stars at night given the right conditions, but with the use of just an amateur telescope, you can see up to 1,000,000 stars in each hemisphere. Given that the scholars of Celia and Rhyolaccaria studied the stars with pretty high-grade telescopes, it's safe to assume that Radahn, at the very least, would hold the power to stop 2,000,000 stars, thus giving us a total energy output of 9.6 times 10 to the power of 46 joules, which is solar system level. This would be consistent as the Elden Beast can seemingly create a dimension with numerous stars, which would require multi-solar system levels of power, and the Elden Ring is also directly stated to command the stars, which would at least give us similar amounts of power to Radahn, due to it having the power to move a bunch of stars. But if we go as high as to say it controls literally all the stars in the universe, then the resulting power needed to move every star would be between high-end multi-solar system level to low galaxy level. Either way, the Tarnished should be in the solar system to multi-solar system ranges, with some potential galaxy level scaling. Speed-wise, we do actually have some concrete scaling. Upon beating Promised Consort Radahn, you get one of his boss weapons, specifically the Greatsword of Radahn light version. And the Ash of War for this weapon is directly stated to deliver a downward slash at the speed of light. Given that the Tarnished is able to dodge Radahn when he is using this attack, it's safe to assume the Tarnished should be around the sub-relativistic ranges with light speed attacks when using the aforementioned sword and certain fast-moving spells. So to recap, in last place comes Sekiro, who despite being the third fastest on the list, comes in last due to his lack of physical strength. In fourth place is the Slayer of Demons. While significantly stronger than Sekiro, they don't have the AP or speed to keep up with the others. In third place comes the Hunter. While being the second fastest, just like with Sekiro, their AP does not hold up to the top two. In second place, we have the Ashen One. Slow as they might be, their AP puts them far and above any previous character. And in first place, the strongest of them all, the Tarnished. Not only are they significantly stronger than everyone else, but they also have the speed to leave everyone in the dust. The Tarnished is by far the strongest Soulsborne protagonist, and only when FromSoft drops another award-winning game will we be able to see if anyone can trump this beast of a warrior.